I should never have answered that interview. Looking back now, I can see all the signs I missed. The way the email arrived at exactly 3:47 a.m. when I was staring at my laptop, surrounded by overdue bills and rejection letters. The way the company name, Ashford Dynamics, seemed to pulse on my screen like it was breathing. The way my chest tightened the moment I clicked, accept interview. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the beginning, to the person I was before everything changed, before I understood what I really am. My name is Vivian Cole, though everyone calls me Viv. 23 years old, perpetually broke, living in a cramped apartment with 3 roommates who thought 2 a.m. was an appropriate time for karaoke practice. I was in my final year of graduate school, studying something I'd already forgotten I was passionate about, just trying to survive until graduation. My life was a monotonous cycle of ramen noodles, student debt, and the growing realization that my degree might be worthless in the real world. That's why I needed the internship. Any internship. I'd sent out maybe 200 applications over 3 months. The rejections had become so routine I barely felt them anymore. Until that night. Until Ashford Dynamics. The building was in the financial district. One of those glass monoliths that reflects the sky so perfectly, you can't tell where the structure ends and the clouds begin. 49 floors of steel, money, and secrets. I remember standing on the sidewalk that morning, staring up until my neck hurt, feeling impossibly small. The revolving doors looked like they could swallow me whole. I'd done my research, of course. Ashford Dynamics was one of those companies that existed in the periphery of public knowledge. Massive, influential, but somehow always just out of the spotlight. They had their hands in everything. Tech, pharmaceuticals, defense contracts, energy, the kind of corporation that shapes the world from the shadows. And at the center of it all was one man, Xavier Ashford. Even the name sounded dangerous. I'd seen exactly 3 photos of him online, all at least 5 years old, all carefully staged at charity galas or board meetings. Dark hair, sharp jawline, eyes that seemed to look through the camera rather than at it. But those images didn't prepare me for what it would feel like to be in the same room with him. The elevator ride to the 43rd floor took forever, and no time at all. My reflection in the mirrored walls looked terrified. Cheap blazer, hair I'd tried and failed to tame, hands shaking slightly as I clutched my portfolio. I practiced my introduction under my breath, the same lines I'd used for every other interview. Hello, I'm Vivian Cole, and I believe my background in... The elevator chimed, the doors opened, and that's when everything started to unravel. The reception area was pristine, too pristine. White marble floors, minimalist furniture, not a single personal touch anywhere. A woman with perfect posture and a Bluetooth earpiece sat behind a glass desk that seemed to float in midair. She looked at me like I was something she needed to scrape off her shoe. She told me to sit and wait, that Mr. Ashford would see me shortly. Her voice was cold, professionally cold, the kind of cold that's been practiced and perfected over years of making people feel small. I sat in one of those designer chairs that's beautiful but completely uncomfortable, designed to make you leave faster. 20 minutes passed, then 40, then an hour. I watched other people come and go, men in expensive suits, women who moved like they'd never doubted themselves for a single second in their lives. None of them even glanced in my direction. I was about to leave, about to admit this had been a waste of time, when the receptionist's phone rang. She answered it, her eyes flickering to me for the first time since I'd arrived. She nodded once, then stood. Mr. Ashford will see you now. My legs felt like water as I followed her down a hallway lined with modern art that probably cost more than my entire education. We stopped in front of massive double doors, dark wood, no nameplate, no decoration, just 2 slabs of expensive timber that looked heavy enough to stop a bullet. The receptionist knocked once and opened the door without waiting for a response. She gestured for me to enter, then disappeared before I could thank her or ask any questions or do anything except walk forward into the unknown. The office was enormous, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city, a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of obsidian, shelves lined with books I recognized, philosophy, military strategy, quantum physics, and in the center of it all, standing with his back to me, looking out at the skyline like he owned every building in his view, was Xavier Ashford. He didn't turn around immediately, didn't acknowledge me, just stood there, hands in his pockets, perfectly still. I could see his reflection in the window, sharp features, dark hair touched with just enough gray at the temples to make him look distinguished rather than old. He was probably in his late 30s, maybe 40, tall, the kind of tall that makes you feel like gravity works differently for him. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than I expected, controlled, the kind of voice that never needs to be raised to command attention. He told me to sit without turning around. I sat. The leather chair was impossibly comfortable, which somehow made me more nervous. I opened my portfolio, ready to launch into my carefully prepared speech about my qualifications and passion for the industry and all the other lies I'd polished for these occasions. But before I could say a single word, he turned around, and our eyes met. That's when it happened. The first time, before I even understood what it was. Have you ever touched a live wire? That split second before the pain registers, when your entire nervous system lights up with electricity and you can't move, can't breathe, can only feel every atom in your body vibrating at a frequency that shouldn't be possible. That's what it felt like when Xavier Ashford looked at me. But it wasn't just electricity. It was recognition. Deep, impossible recognition. Like seeing someone you knew in a past life. Like remembering something that never happened to you. My chest tightened, my skin prickled with heat, and for a moment, just a fraction of a second, I could have sworn I felt his heartbeat. Not heard it. Felt it, like it was in my own chest, beating in sync with mine. His expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or fear. He crossed the room and sat behind his desk, his movements measured and deliberate, like he was being careful not to make any sudden gestures. He looked at my resume, though I could tell he wasn't really reading it. His jaw was tight. When he finally spoke, he asked me why I wanted to work at Ashford Dynamics. I gave him the standard answer, the one I'd practiced, something about innovative solutions and meaningful work and professional growth. The words felt hollow in my mouth, especially with the way he was looking at me, not at my face, but through it, like he was trying to solve an equation written on my soul. He asked me 3 more questions, simple ones. What was my biggest weakness? What did I know about the company? Where did I see myself in 5 years? I answered on autopilot, my voice steady even though my hands were shaking in my lap where he couldn't see them. The interview lasted exactly 4 minutes. He stood up abruptly, told me that someone from HR would be in touch, and gestured toward the door. Dismissed. Just like that. I barely had time to grab my portfolio before I was standing in the hallway again, my heart pounding, my skin still tingling from whatever the hell had just happened in that room. I took the elevator down in a daze, walked out into the street where the sunlight felt too bright, the sounds of the city too loud. I found a bench 2 blocks away and sat there for 20 minutes, trying to understand what I'd just experienced, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Just nerves, just adrenaline, just the stress of another failed interview. But I knew better. Something had happened in that office, something that had nothing to do with internships or qualifications or professional ambition, something that had everything to do with the way his presence had filled the room like smoke, the way my body had responded to him before my brain even registered he was there, the way I could still feel the ghost of his heartbeat in my chest, even though he'd never touched me, even though we'd been separated by 15 feet of expensive carpet the entire time. I went home and tried to forget about it, tried to lose myself in assignments and job applications, and the general chaos of living with people who didn't understand the concept of quiet hours. But that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I kept replaying those 4 minutes over and over in my mind, the way he'd looked at me, like I was a problem he needed to solve, like I was dangerous, like I was inevitable. The email came at 6:32 the next morning. I know the exact time because I'd barely slept, and I was staring at my phone when the notification lit up the screen. The subject line was simple: position offer, Ashford Dynamics. I sat up so fast I got dizzy, clicked it open with trembling fingers. The email was brief and professional. I'd been selected for the internship position. Start date was Monday. Salary was more than 3 times what I'd been expecting. Benefits included: office on the 43rd floor, report directly to Mr. Ashford's executive team, report directly to... My stomach dropped. There was no way this was real. I'd barely spoken during the interview. I hadn't impressed him. I'd sat there like an idiot, trying not to stare, trying to breathe normally while my entire nervous system short-circuited. And yet somehow, impossibly, I'd gotten the job. I should have been celebrating. Instead, I felt a cold knot of dread settle in my chest, because I knew, even then, even before everything that came after, that this wasn't about my qualifications. This wasn't about my resume or my potential or anything rational. This was about whatever had happened in that office. That moment when our eyes met and the world tilted on its axis. This was about him recognizing something in me, something I didn't even know I had. I started the following Monday. The first week was normal, suspiciously normal. I was assigned to a team of analysts who barely looked up from their computers when I introduced myself. I was given a desk and an open floor plan filled with people who all seemed to move in perfect synchronization. typing, calling, existing in a kind of corporate choreography I couldn't quite match. The work was straightforward: data analysis, market research, building presentations that would probably never be looked at. I didn't see Xavier Ashford once. Not in the hallways, not in the elevator, not even in passing. It was like he didn't exist outside that office on the 43rd floor. I told myself I was relieved, told myself the strange feeling from the interview had been a fluke, a moment of weakness brought on by stress and bad coffee. But I was lying to myself, because every time the elevator doors opened, my heart jumped. Every time someone walked past my desk, I looked up, hoping and dreading it would be him. Every time my phone buzzed with a work email, I felt that same electric tingle I'd experienced in his office, that same irrational certainty that he was nearby even when he wasn't. It was Thursday afternoon when everything changed again. I was working late, trying to finish a report that was due the next morning. The office had emptied out around 7, and by 9 o'clock I was one of maybe 5 people left on the entire floor. The overhead lights had dimmed to their after-hours setting, giving everything a strange, dreamlike quality. I was so focused on my laptop that I didn't hear him approach. He asked me what I was still doing there, his voice coming from directly behind my chair, and I jumped so hard I knocked my coffee over. Lukewarm liquid spread across my desk, soaking into papers and making my keyboard spark ominously. I spun around, heart racing, and there he was, Xavier Ashford. Sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, looking like he'd also been working late but somehow making exhaustion look elegant. He was holding his suit jacket over one shoulder, and in the dim light, I could see the edge of what looked like a tattoo on his forearm, something angular and geometric that disappeared under his sleeve. He grabbed a box of tissues from a nearby desk and helped me mop up the spill without a word, his movements efficient and practiced. I tried to apologize, tried to explain that I was just finishing the Henderson report, but my voice came out shaky and small. He told me to stop apologizing, that accidents happen, and that I should go home because the building would be locking down soon. I nodded and started packing up my things, hyper-aware of his presence beside me, of the way the air seemed thicker when he was around. He walked with me to the elevator bank, which should have been a simple, forgettable moment. Should have been. We stepped into the elevator together. The doors closed. He pressed the button for the ground floor. The car started its descent, and then the lights went out. Not just the elevator lights, everything. The emergency lights didn't kick in. The digital floor display went dark. We were suspended in absolute, complete blackness, the kind of dark that makes you feel like you've gone blind. The elevator shuddered once and stopped moving with a mechanical groan that echoed in the shaft. I heard myself make a small sound, not quite a scream, but close. And then I felt his hand on my arm, steadying me. And that's when it happened again. That electricity, that impossible recognition. But this time it was stronger. This time it didn't just make my skin tingle. It made my entire body feel like it was burning from the inside out. I gasped and pulled away, pressing myself against the elevator wall, my chest heaving. In the darkness, I couldn't see him, but I could feel him, could sense exactly where he was standing, exactly how fast his heart was beating, exactly how carefully he was controlling his breathing. It was like we were connected by an invisible thread, and the more I tried to ignore it, the tighter it pulled. He spoke my name, and his voice was different than I'd heard before. Strained, almost afraid. He told me not to move, to stay exactly where I was, to breathe slowly and not panic. But it was too late for that, because something inside me was waking up. Something that had been dormant my entire life, sleeping in the deepest part of my DNA, waiting for this exact moment, waiting for him. Heat radiated from my chest, spreading through my limbs like liquid fire. My vision started to adjust to the darkness, but not in a normal way. I could see shapes, outlines, shadows that shouldn't be visible in complete blackness. And I could see him, standing across from me, his hand pressed against the wall like he was trying to hold himself upright. He spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper, and what he said made no sense. He told me to breathe through it, to let it happen, but don't let it take control. He said that he knew what I was feeling, that he was feeling it too, that this was exactly what he'd been afraid of since the moment I walked into his office. I didn't understand, couldn't understand. All I knew was that I needed to touch him again. Needed it like oxygen, like water, like something essential to survival. My body moved without permission, taking a step forward, then another, drawn to him by a force I couldn't name or resist. He warned me again, more urgently this time. He said my name like a prayer and a curse, told me that if I touched him again, everything would change, that there would be no going back, that I would be in danger, that he would be in danger, but I couldn't stop. The pull was too strong, the need too overwhelming. I reached out in the darkness, my hand finding his chest, and the moment my palm made contact with his shirt, the world exploded. Light. Not from the elevator, from us. From the point where my hand touched him, a soft glow spread across his chest, illuminating patterns I'd never seen before. Intricate geometric designs that looked like circuitry and ancient runes had a child together. They pulsed under his skin, glowing brighter with each beat of his heart. And when I looked down at my own arm, I saw the same patterns appearing, spreading from where we touched, running up my arm like luminescent veins. The connection was immediate and absolute. I could feel everything he was feeling: shock, fear, desire, recognition. I could sense his memories flickering at the edge of my consciousness, images and emotions that weren't mine but somehow were. A training facility when he was younger, someone teaching him to suppress something dangerous inside himself, years of discipline and control, and underlying it all, a loneliness so profound it made my chest ache. He pulled away, breaking the contact, and the glow faded slowly, leaving afterimages on my retina. In the returning darkness, I heard him breathing hard, heard him move to the opposite corner of the elevator, like he was trying to put as much distance between us as possible in that small space. He told me he was sorry, that he hadn't meant for this to happen, that he'd spent the last 12 years making sure it never would happen. And then he said something that changed everything. He said that I was his catalyst. I asked him what that meant, my voice shaking, still feeling the ghost of those glowing patterns on my skin. He was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with something that sounded like grief. He explained that certain people are born with a dormant ability, something coded into their DNA that allows them to, he struggled for the word, to interface with reality in ways that shouldn't be possible. But this ability stays locked away unless it's activated by a specific person. A perfect genetic match. A catalyst. He told me that he was one of these people, that he'd been trained from childhood to control his ability, to keep it dormant, to never let it fully manifest. Because when it does manifest, when someone like him connects with their catalyst, they become powerful. Too powerful. The kind of powerful that makes them a target for people who want to exploit that power or eliminate the threat it poses. He said he'd been safe for 12 years, had convinced himself he would never meet his catalyst, had built an entire life around that assumption. And then I walked into his office. I wanted to tell him he was crazy, that this was impossible, that people don't glow in the dark and feel each other's emotions and connect on some cosmic level just from touching. But I couldn't deny what I'd just experienced, couldn't explain away the patterns that had appeared on our skin, or the way I'd felt his memories like they were my own. The lights came back on suddenly, harsh and fluorescent. The elevator lurched and continued its descent like nothing had happened. We stood on opposite sides of the car, not looking at each other, both of us trying to process what had just occurred. When the doors opened on the ground floor, he stepped out first, straightening his tie, his face an unreadable mask. He turned to me before walking away and told me to go straight home, not to talk to anyone, not to tell anyone what had happened. He said he would explain everything tomorrow, but tonight I needed to be careful. He said that the power surge that had trapped us wasn't random, that someone had done it deliberately to see if what they suspected about me was true. He told me that as of that moment, I was in danger, and so was he. Then he disappeared into the lobby, leaving me standing there with my heart racing and my skin still tingling and absolutely no idea what I'd gotten myself into. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my bed with all the lights on, staring at my hands, trying to will those glowing patterns to reappear. They didn't, but I could still feel something under my skin, like a current of electricity running through my veins, waiting to be unleashed again. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, just 4 words, West Entrance, 6 a.m. I knew it was from him, knew I should ignore it, should block the number, should pretend none of this was real. Instead, I set an alarm and tried to get at least 2 hours of sleep. When I arrived at the West Entrance at 6 the next morning, he was already there, leaning against an expensive black car that probably cost more than my entire apartment building. He was wearing sunglasses even though the sun was barely up, dressed in dark clothes that made him blend into the shadows. He opened the passenger door without greeting me, a gesture that was somehow both courteous and commanding. I got in. What else was I going to do? He drove in silence for 20 minutes, taking us out of the city and into an industrial area I'd never seen before. Warehouses and storage facilities and places that looked abandoned but probably weren't. Finally, he pulled into a parking garage beneath a nondescript building and killed the engine. That's when he finally started explaining, He told me that there were people in this world, humans, but different, who possessed abilities that the general population didn't know about and couldn't comprehend. These abilities were genetic, passed down through specific bloodlines, kept secret for centuries. And these people, these gifted, as he called them, organized themselves into various factions. Some wanted to reveal themselves to the world. Some wanted to rule it. Some just wanted to be left alone. He said he came from a line of architects, people who could manipulate reality at a fundamental level, bend physical laws, create or destroy with thought. But that power came with a price. It required perfect control, absolute discipline. One moment of weakness, and an architect could level a city block without meaning to. That's why they stayed dormant, why they trained themselves to keep their abilities locked away. Because the power was too dangerous, too volatile, too likely to attract attention from those who would exploit it, unless they met their catalyst. He explained that a catalyst didn't just activate an architect's power, they stabilized it. They made it controllable, sustainable, safe. Together, an architect and their catalyst could do things that neither could do alone. They became, essentially, a weapon or a miracle, depending on who was watching. And there were always people watching. He told me about the organizations that hunted catalysts, that tracked bloodlines and monitored genetic markers and did everything in their power to either control or eliminate the people who could activate the architects. He said that the moment our connection manifested in that elevator, we'd become targets. That someone, somewhere, was already planning how to capture us or kill us or use us for their own purposes. I asked him why he'd hired me if he knew what I was, if he'd recognized me in that first interview. He admitted that he'd hoped he was wrong, that he'd wanted to keep me close to see if the connection would manifest or if it was just his paranoia. He said he'd spent 12 years avoiding situations where he might meet his catalyst, and then I'd walked into his office and shattered every defense he'd built. He said he'd hired me because he needed to understand what I was, needed to control the variables, needed to keep me where he could protect me if things went wrong, which they had. I wanted to be angry with him, wanted to accuse him of manipulation and deception and treating me like an experiment. But the truth was, I was more terrified than angry, because everything he was saying, as insane as it sounded, explained the inexplicable, explained why I'd felt that instant recognition, why his heartbeat had felt like mine, why touching him had unlocked something inside me that I didn't even know existed. He reached into the back seat and pulled out a tablet, showed me surveillance footage from the building. The power surge hadn't been citywide. It had affected only the Ashford Dynamics building, only certain floors. And if you looked carefully at the timestamp, it had happened exactly when we entered the elevator together. Someone had been testing their theory, seeing if I was what they thought I was. And now they knew for certain. He told me I had two choices. I could walk away, go back to my old life, forget any of this happened, and hope that whoever was watching would lose interest. Or I could let him train me, teach me how to control whatever was waking up inside me, learn how to survive in a world I didn't know existed until yesterday. He warned me that if I chose to stay, my life would never be the same, that I would be giving up safety and normalcy and any chance of an ordinary future. But if I left, I would always be vulnerable, always be wondering when someone would come for me, always be a target with no way to defend myself. I asked him what he wanted me to do. He removed his sunglasses, and I saw his eyes clearly for the first time in natural light, gray with flecks of gold, intense and ancient and sad. He told me that what he wanted didn't matter, that this had to be my choice. But then he said something that made the decision for me. He said that every moment we spent together, the bond would grow stronger, that eventually we wouldn't be able to be apart without physical pain, that we would become dependent on each other in ways that went beyond emotional or psychological. It would be cellular, molecular, fundamental. He said that he'd been fighting it since the moment we met, trying to keep his distance, trying to prevent the inevitable, but it was too late. The connection had been made. We were already bound to each other, whether we wanted it or not. I looked at him sitting there in that dark parking garage, this powerful, dangerous man who just admitted he was as trapped as I was, and I realized I'd already made my choice, had made it the moment I'd touched him in that elevator, maybe even earlier, maybe the moment I'd clicked accept on that interview request. I told him I would stay, that he should teach me whatever I needed to know, that I was tired of being helpless and confused and afraid. Something flickered across his face. Relief, maybe, or resignation. He nodded once and started the car. That's how my real education began. For the next 3 weeks, I lived a double life. During the day, I went to work at Ashford Dynamics like nothing had changed, sitting at my desk, analyzing data, attending meetings I barely paid attention to. But every morning at 6 and every evening after everyone else had gone home, Xavier trained me. He taught me how to sense the energy around me, how to feel the connection that pulsed between us even when we were in different rooms. He showed me breathing techniques that could suppress or amplify what he called my resonance. He made me practice visualization exercises until I could see those glowing patterns in my mind even when they weren't visible on my skin. It was exhausting, frustrating. Every session left me drained and shaking, my head pounding, my body feeling like I'd run a marathon. But I was getting stronger. I could feel it, could sense when he was nearby before I saw him, could sometimes catch flashes of his emotions when the connection flared bright between us. And it was flaring more often. He was careful never to touch me directly, always maintained a physical distance. But the bond didn't need physical contact to grow. It fed on proximity, on shared space, on the simple fact that we existed in the same world. Every day it got harder for him to concentrate, harder for both of us to pretend we were just mentor and student, employer and employee, anything simple or explainable. The attraction was undeniable now, electric and inevitable and completely inappropriate given the power dynamic and the danger we were in. But it was there, humming between us like a live wire, growing stronger every time our eyes met across a room. He told me it was part of the bond, that architects and their catalysts always felt this pull toward each other, that it was biological, not romantic, a trick of genetics and evolution to ensure that the pairs stayed together. I didn't believe him. I don't think he believed himself. On the 23rd day of training, everything went wrong. I was leaving work late again, had stayed to finish a project that I'd been neglecting in favor of my secret education. The parking garage was nearly empty, just a few cars scattered across multiple levels. I was almost to my beat-up sedan when I felt it, that prickling sensation at the back of my neck that Xavier had taught me meant someone was watching. I turned slowly and saw 3 of them. Men in dark clothes, moving with a coordinated purpose that screamed military training. They didn't run, didn't rush, just walked toward me in a formation that cut off any escape route, calm and professional and absolutely terrifying. I did what Xavier had taught me, stayed calm, assessed my options, looked for exits and weapons and anything I could use to my advantage. But I was trapped. The only way out was through them, and they knew it. The one in front spoke, his voice polite and conversational. He said they weren't going to hurt me, that they just wanted to talk, that they represented an organization that could offer me protection and answers, and a future that didn't involve being hunted for the rest of my life. All I had to do was come with them, voluntarily. I told him no. He sighed like I'd disappointed him, pulled out a small device that looked like a phone but wasn't, pressed a button. And suddenly my entire body seized up, muscles locking, nerves firing in rapid succession. A taser without the wires, some kind of directed energy weapon. I collapsed to the concrete, unable to scream, unable to move, unable to do anything except feel my body betraying me. They approached. One of them pulled out zip ties, started reaching for my wrists. And that's when Xavier appeared. I didn't see him arrive, didn't hear him. 1 second the men were alone with me, and the next he was there, moving faster than should be possible. And the air around him was different, charged. Like reality itself was bending in his presence. The first man didn't even have time to react before Xavier's hand touched his chest, and he flew backward, hitting a concrete pillar 15 feet away with a sickening crack. The second one managed to raise his weapon, but Xavier was already moving, his movements fluid and practiced and absolutely lethal. The third man tried to run and made it maybe 5 steps before something invisible grabbed him and slammed him face first into the ground. Then Xavier was kneeling beside me, his hands hovering over my body, not quite touching. I could see those patterns glowing under his skin now, bright and fierce and beautiful. He asked me if I could move, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. I managed to nod, though my muscles were still twitching from the weapon's effects. He helped me to my feet, and the moment his skin made contact with mine, everything else faded. The pain, the fear. The 3 unconscious men scattered around us. All of it became distant and unimportant compared to the feeling of that connection surging between us, stronger than it had ever been, amplified by adrenaline and danger and the simple fact that he'd come for me. He told me we needed to leave, now, that more would be coming, that this was just the first attempt and it wouldn't be the last. He drove us to his penthouse, a sleek modern space on the top floor of a building that probably had more security than most government facilities, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city, minimalist furniture that probably cost more than I'd make in a lifetime, art that belonged in museums. He paced while I sat on his expensive couch, still shaking from the attack. He was angry, not at me, but at himself. He said he'd been careless, that he'd let his guard down, that he should have anticipated they'd move this quickly, that he'd put me in danger by thinking he could train me while keeping me in the open. I told him it wasn't his fault, that I'd chosen this, that I knew the risks. He stopped pacing and looked at me, really looked at me, and something in his expression broke. He said that knowing the risks and experiencing them were different things, that seeing me on that concrete, helpless and in pain, had made him realize exactly what this bond meant, what it would cost both of us. He crossed the room and knelt in front of me, his hands on the couch on either side of me, caging me in without touching me. I could see every detail of his face from this distance, the slight scar above his left eyebrow, the gold flecks in his gray eyes, the tension in his jaw from grinding his teeth. He told me the truth then. The real truth, not the clinical explanation he'd given me before. He said that I wasn't just his catalyst. I wasn't just the person who could activate and stabilize his power. I was the only person in the entire world who could make him feel human, make him feel safe, make him feel like he was something more than a weapon that needed to be controlled or destroyed. He said that for 12 years he'd been alone, isolated, convinced that connection was weakness and that he needed to remain separate from humanity to protect it from himself. And then I'd appeared, and everything he'd built came crashing down. He told me that the bond between us wasn't just biological imperative or genetic compatibility. It was recognition at the deepest level, soul recognizing soul, and that every moment we spent together made it harder for him to remember why he'd been fighting it. He asked me if I understood what he was saying, if I knew what it meant. I did, because I'd felt it too, that pull that was more than physical, that sense of rightness when he was near, that feeling of incompleteness when he wasn't. I reached out and touched his face, my fingers tracing that small scar, and the moment our skin made contact, the world dissolved into light and sensation and perfect, terrifying clarity. This time, the connection was different, stronger, more complete. I could see his memories clearly now, feel his emotions like they were my own. I saw him as a child, being tested and trained and taught to fear himself. Saw him learning to suppress everything natural and human in the name of control. Saw years of loneliness and discipline and the weight of being something that people feared. And he saw me, saw my childhood, my insecurities, my hopes and fears, and the quiet desperation that had led me to answer that interview request. Saw every part of me I'd tried to hide from the world. We saw each other completely, without filters or pretense or the possibility of lies. And in that moment of absolute transparency, we both knew the truth. This wasn't going away. This wasn't something we could fight or suppress or ignore. The bond was real, it was powerful, and it was growing stronger every moment we spent together. Xavier pulled back first, breaking the contact, breathing hard. He stood and moved to the windows, putting distance between us, his hands shaking slightly. He said that we had a problem. Multiple problems, actually. First, the people who'd attacked me wouldn't give up. They knew what I was now, knew that I was his catalyst, and they would keep coming until they either captured us or eliminated the threat we posed. Second, the bond was accelerating faster than normal. Usually, the connection between an architect and their catalyst developed over months or years. Ours had gone from 0 to critical in less than 4 weeks, which meant we were both at risk of losing control if we couldn't figure out how to manage it. Third, he'd just killed 3 people in that parking garage. He'd tried not to, had pulled his punches, but at least one of them had hit that pillar hard enough that survival was unlikely, which meant he'd broken the most important rule of his training: never use his power lethally, never become the monster people feared he could be, and he'd done it without hesitation to protect me. I asked him what we were going to do. He turned from the window, and his expression was resigned and determined and heartbreaking all at once. He said we had 2 options. Option 1, he could sever the bond. There was a way to do it, a technique he'd learned in case he ever accidentally activated with the wrong person. It was dangerous and painful, and would leave us both damaged in ways that might never heal. But it would free us from each other, free us from the target on our backs, free us from this pull that was becoming harder and harder to resist. Option 2, we could accept it, stop fighting, let the bond complete itself and deal with whatever came after. We would be more powerful together than any architect and catalyst pairing in generations, powerful enough to defend ourselves, powerful enough to be dangerous, powerful enough to change everything. He told me he would understand if I chose option 1, that he would do it himself if that's what I wanted, that he wouldn't blame me for choosing safety over the unknown. But his eyes told a different story. His eyes were begging me to choose him, to choose us, to choose the terrifying, exhilarating, impossible thing that was growing between us. I stood and crossed the room to him, my heart pounding, my entire body humming with the proximity. I looked up at him, at this powerful, lonely, dangerous man who'd been fighting his own nature for 12 years. And I told him that I'd never been the kind of person who chose safety over possibility. I told him that I was terrified, that I didn't understand half of what was happening, that I'd known him for less than a month and this all felt too fast, too intense, too much. But I also told him that when I'd been lying on that concrete, paralyzed and helpless, with those men approaching, my only thought had been that I hoped he would feel my fear through our bond, that I'd been calling out to him without words, without conscious thought, just pure instinct and need, and he'd heard me, felt me, come for me. I told him that whatever we were becoming, whatever danger we were facing, I wanted to face it together, not because the bond demanded it, not because biology or genetics or cosmic fate said we had to, but because when I looked at him, I saw someone who understood what it meant to be afraid of your own potential, someone who knew what it cost to hide who you really are, someone who'd been alone for too long and was tired of pretending he didn't need anyone. I saw myself reflected back in someone else's eyes, and that was worth fighting for. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then, very slowly, very deliberately, he raised his hand and touched my face, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone, and the connection flared so bright between us that the lights in the penthouse flickered. He told me that if we did this, there was no going back, that the bond would complete itself and we would be linked for life, that we would feel each other's emotions, share each other's pain, be unable to be apart for long without physical discomfort, that our lives would be intertwined in ways that went beyond romance or partnership. We would be fundamentally changed on a molecular level. He told me that people would hunt us, that we would have to fight to survive, that the life I'd planned for myself was over, replaced by something I couldn't yet imagine. He told me all of this while still touching me, while the patterns glowed under both our skins, while my entire body felt like it was singing with the rightness of his presence. And then he asked me one last time if I was sure. I kissed him. Not because I had a better answer, not because I'd fully processed everything he'd said, but because in that moment, with his hand on my face and those patterns lighting us up from the inside, words seemed inadequate. The moment our lips touched, the bond completed itself. It wasn't gentle. It was overwhelming and consuming and absolutely unstoppable. Energy poured between us, through us, remaking us at the most fundamental level. I felt his power flowing into me, wild and fierce and finally free after 12 years of suppression. And I felt something in me rising to meet it, to balance it, to shape it into something that could be controlled and directed and used. We were incandescent, literally. The glow was so bright that I could see it through my closed eyelids, see the patterns spreading across every inch of exposed skin, intricate and beautiful and absolutely terrifying. The windows behind us cracked from the surge of energy. The lights exploded. Electronic devices sparked and died. And through it all, I felt him, felt everything. His fear and relief and desire and hope and the bone-deep loneliness that was finally ending. Felt him feeling me in return, experiencing my wonder and terror and the fierce joy of finally belonging somewhere. When it was over, when the light faded and the energy settled and we were left standing in the wreckage of his penthouse, we were different, changed, bound together in a way that would never be undone. He held me while I shook from the aftermath, his arms solid and real and safe. He told me that we'd done it, that the bond was complete, that we were officially the most dangerous partnership his kind had seen in 3 generations. He also told me that his security system had just alerted him to multiple unauthorized intrusions in the building, that whoever wanted us had been waiting for exactly this moment when we were vulnerable and disoriented from the bonding. They were coming for us now. He pulled back and looked at me, and I saw something new in his eyes, not just connection, but absolute certainty. He told me that he needed me to trust him, that what happened next would be terrifying, but that we could handle it together. He took my hand, and for the first time since we'd met, touching him didn't make me feel like I was going to explode. It felt right, natural, like this was how it was always supposed to be. He told me to close my eyes and hold on tight, and then he showed me what we could do. The world shifted. That's the only way I can describe it. Reality bent around us, responding to his will, and suddenly we weren't in his penthouse anymore. We were in the parking garage below, next to his car, and I could hear footsteps echoing from the stairwell, people searching for us in the building above. He'd teleported us, moved us through space using nothing but thought and power and our combined will. My legs gave out, and he caught me before I hit the ground. He apologized, said that I'd get used to it eventually, That moving through space like that was disorienting the first few times, but would become second nature once I learned to help him navigate. We got in the car. He drove fast but controlled, taking turns that would have terrified me yesterday, but now felt like a dance we both knew the steps to. I could feel his focus, his calculation, his awareness of every car around us and every possible threat. And I realized that I was helping him somehow, extending his senses, giving him information he couldn't have gathered on his own. We were a system now, a perfect machine with two parts that operated as one. He told me we were going somewhere safe, somewhere he'd prepared for exactly this scenario. A place off the grid where we could figure out our next move without being tracked or traced or attacked every 5 minutes. I asked him what our next move would be, what we were supposed to do now that we were bonded and on the run and apparently powerful enough to terrify the people who terrified him. He glanced at me, and even in the darkness of the car, I could see the smile on his face. It was the first real smile I'd seen from him, and it transformed his entire face, made him look younger and less burdened and almost happy despite the circumstances. He told me that now we got to rewrite the rules, that we got to decide what we would become, that every architect and catalyst pairing before us had either been controlled by the organizations that found them or destroyed when they refused to be controlled. But we were different. We were aware. We were prepared. We were strong enough to fight back. He said that the people hunting us thought we were a weapon they needed to acquire or neutralize, but they were wrong. We weren't a weapon. We were a revolution, and we were just getting started. He reached over and took my hand again, his fingers intertwining with mine, and I felt the bond pulse between us, steady and strong and eternal. I didn't know where we were going, didn't know what challenges we would face, or how many people we would have to fight, or what the future held for two people who'd just fundamentally altered the course of their lives. But for the first time in as long as I could remember, I wasn't afraid, because I wasn't alone anymore. None of this would be easy. I knew that the people who'd attacked me would keep coming, that more would join them, that we'd be running and fighting and struggling to survive for the foreseeable future. Knew that the bond between us would be tested in ways I couldn't yet imagine. Knew that loving someone this way, needing someone this way, being fundamentally dependent on another person's existence, would be both a gift and a curse. But as we drove through the city toward whatever came next, with his hand in mine and our hearts beating in perfect synchronization, I realized something important. I'd spent my entire life feeling like I didn't quite fit anywhere, like there was something essential missing, like I was incomplete in some fundamental way I couldn't articulate. And then I'd walked into an office on the 43rd floor of a glass tower, looked into a stranger's eyes, and found the missing piece. Whatever happened next, whoever came for us, whatever price we'd have to pay for being what we are, it was worth it. Because I finally understood what it meant to be whole. The city lights blurred past the windows as we left everything familiar behind. Xavier's thumb traced circles on the back of my hand, a small gesture that sent warmth flooding through our bond. I leaned my head against the seat and closed my eyes, feeling his presence in my mind, steady and unbreakable. This wasn't the end of anything. It was a beginning, and whatever came next, we would face it together, as we should, as we were always meant to, complete.